In this lesson, we'll discuss handling exceptions. Topics include: what is an exception? When are exceptions thrown? How do you catch exceptions? And how are exceptions useful when developing a website? Moving to the first code example, we have a class test in which there's a public method divide. Divide displays the two operands and then performs a division, returning the result. On line 15, we instantiate the class. On lines 18 and 20, we attempt to run the divide method. On line 20, we'll expect, of course, that there will be a warning because we're attempting to divide by 0. Moving over to the browser, let's look at the first example. So as expected, we have a warning division by 0. The code does continue, of course. However, the warning is an undesirable output. How can we deal with the warning? The answer is, because we're working with objects, we can take advantage of a mechanism referred to as an exception. An exception is a built-in PHP class which is designed for handling errors which are generated within object classes. Moving to the second code example, we make a slight change to the divide method to test to see, is the second operand equal to 0? If so, we can deliberately throw an exception by using the throw command followed by new exception, which generates an exception object based on the exception class. We then supply the output that's desired to be in the exception message that is generated. Otherwise, we perform the division as normal. On line 20, we instantiate the object. You'll notice now on lines 23 through 30, we wrap the suspect code inside a try block. We use the keyword try, followed by an opening brace. We then have the two lines of code that might possibly throw an exception. On line 28, we terminate the try block. We open up the catch block. Inside the parentheses, we're going to try to catch an exception, and then we assign a variable, in this case, just simply $E. We open up the block. On line 29, we have our recovery code, which just simply displays the message generated, and then we close the block on line 30. Let's have a look now at the difference in the output. So this is the second example. As you can see, very clean output, very much under control. We have the first division, which was successful. The second division, we generate our own message, cannot divide by 0, which allows us to gracefully recover from the problem situation. The next question arises, however, what if you're dealing with a built-in PHP class, a class for which you don't have the capability of generating your own exceptions? Now, obviously, you could extend the class and then override the capability, as was discussed in another lesson. However, we can also take advantage of the exception class even under these circumstances. For this example, we're going to use the built-in class datetime. Documentation on the datetime class is identified on line 7. We go to the php.net manual. We look at book.datetime.php for more information. On line 9, we create a date string, which is year, month, day. On line 10, we create a datetime instance using the date string. We then echo the date along with the full date. You'll notice that we're using the format method of the datetime class, which accepts a formatting string. The documentation for the formatting string is identified in php.net manual, language of your choice, function.date.php for more information on the format codes. The format codes that we are using include lowercase l, lowercase d, uppercase f, and uppercase y, representing the full day name, the 2-digit day of the month, the full month name, and the 4-digit year. Now, on lines 17 and 18, we're going to attempt to generate a date using an impossible date string. So in other words, there is no day 33. There is no month 33. Accordingly, we would expect that an exception will be thrown. Let's look now at the third example. So the first example worked fine, and we discover that the 1st of January 2021 is a Friday. The second example did not work because we were using an impossible string, namely 2021 33 33. The question is how to deal with this exception. The answer is we can also use a try-catch block, just as we showed you with the earlier example. Moving now to code example number 1, we use the try and catch block. Inside the try block, we put in the code which might throw the exception. On lines 21 through 27, we have the catch block, which allows us to recover from the error condition. Again, we catch a generic class exception. We assign it to a variable $E. Now we have on lines 22 through 26 our recovery code, including getMessage, which returns the message that was generated. And there are many other methods available as well. We're going to use one called getTrace as string, which returns very valuable information about the nature of the failure. So moving now to the browser, let's have a look at the last example. So as you can see, we have the first date succeeded, the second date, we see the date, but because it's an impossible date, we use our own catch block to recover from this situation. We display a message unable to process date-time information. We then display additional information which comes from the exception object which was created. In review, what is an exception? An exception is the object-oriented programming equivalent to an error. Exception is based on a PHP built-in class, literally called the exception class. When are exceptions thrown? Exceptions can be thrown deliberately by using the command throw new exception. Inside parentheses, you can put a message. Otherwise, you will see exceptions generated by various PHP built-in classes. How do you catch exceptions? You'd utilize the try and catch syntax. Try, open brace, code, which is possibly going to generate an exception, close the block, catch, exception, assign it to a variable, for example, $E, open up the catch block, put in your recovery code, close the block. How are exceptions useful when developing a website? They provide you with a graceful recovery mechanism, which results in less nasty error messages, which are generally not understood by your users, messages which can also be used against your website by attackers. Therefore, exception processing helps to safeguard the website against attackers by revealing less information. This concludes our discussion of handling exceptions.